You're listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast brought to you by DraftKings. You throw down $5 on any NFL game, you win, you get $200 in free plays. It's worth it. You know what else is also worth it? One of the true legends of the Arizona coaching scene, and that's Salpointe coach, ex-Salpointe coach Dennis Bene. Dennis is retired now, but first of all, Coach, before we get into things, why don't you fill the people in a little bit on how you've been?
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me, man. I've been good. Spending a lot more family time, traveling a little bit more, and spending some time with my daughter and my wife, who are in Tucson, and then visiting my son in New York, who's going to school. So things are good. Staying busy and enjoying life.
Great. Okay, when you look at the amount of talent that you were able to coach, there's basically two coaches in the city that I think that have you and Vern Friedley, as far as guys that have just coached next level after next level talent. Tell me a little bit about how, because Salpointe was always a good school before you got there, but tell me how you were kind of able to build it into that next level type, just dominant situation where it controlled the city.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we had a lot to offer, and I tried to, first and foremost, get parents to understand that, Salpointe would provide a great faith-based education and prepare their son for college. And then, once we could get them on campus, then, I told them that we were playing the best schools in the state. They would get great exposure. And that, luckily early on, I had a player named John Caduce who was recruited heavily by Notre Dame, and he really put our program on a national map. And, once John, kids saw John being recruited nationally, we really started to build our program, with the linemen. And I think for the past 20 years, our program was really known for the phenomenal linemen we had. And then that just snowballed into, obviously we were winning, I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that over the last 20 years, we won 80% of our games. So, a combination of a lot of hard work, obviously you had to win, and then having great kids.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those kids. You talked about John Caduce at first, goes off to Notre Dame. You had guys like, even your son, Rocco Benet. You had Jack Darlington.
Mm-hmm.
You had a lot of different guys that kind of got it going. And then by kind of the mid to late 2000s, you start getting your Cam Densons, your players like that have real national pull. Was that just basically the metamorphosis from building it from the foundation, and then people are like, wow, I want to go be part of that?
Yeah, I mean, we in the early 2000s, I had some really good quarterbacks, Tyler Grunke, who played for June Jones at Hawaii. He played in the Sugar Bowl. And my son, we had some tremendous linemen, and we had a lot of kids who were going to like the Ivy Leagues and the 1AAs. And we were just very successful. We had, an unrelenting and unapologetic weight room program, which I, would tell kids like, we're going to, you could play multiple sports at Salpointe, but if you're going to play football, you will spend the year in the weight room. And so once we started to do that, then we started to pick up, a Chris O'Dowd, a Cam Denson, a Jacob Arzuman, kids that eventually went on to play, at Division I schools. And we were very, very blessed to have that continue attracting, the best kids in the city to Salpointe.
Okay, so over the last 3 to 4 years, Salpointe, you guys were already on the map, but when you produce a guy like a Bijan Robinson, who you can tune into College Game Day and Kirk Herbstreit saying that this is the best running back in the country. You've got a Lathan Ransom then, who's the starting safety at Ohio State. You've got a Bruno Fina at UCLA. You got a Jonah Miller at Oregon. You got a Mateo Mele at Washington. It's really kind of just an embarrassment of riches. My question is this. When you got these kids on campus, when you first started coaching them, did you know immediately what these kids would become? Did it take a little bit while from your head coaching perspective, when you're looking at these players, what were kind of your initial impressions when they hit campus?
No, that's a good question. Obviously for some of them you could tell right away. Chris O'Dowd was really athletic for a big kid. He came in at 6'4" and he left at 6'6". Cam, you could see the talent that Cameron had early, and we brought him up to the varsity as a freshman because he played some lower level. We started him at the lower levels, but he was so bored. We brought him up to the varsity right away, and then by the time Cameron was a senior, in my opinion, he was the best player in the state of Arizona, and he's probably the best player I've ever coached because he was so dominant on offense and defense. I mean, his senior year, he was the best wide receiver and the best DB in the state. And obviously he led our team to a state championship. But, and then came like guys like Mateo Mele, who's now at Washington. He came on as a big athletic. We started him at tight end. Once we moved him to O-line, his recruiting blew up because college coaches could see, gosh, here's another 6'6", really athletic kid. And then, lastly, like a Lathan and a Bijan, yeah, they were so dominant early on that, it was a no-brainer. And so their recruiting was pretty crazy, to be honest with you.
Okay, so I want to get into that recruiting, but first, you guys should know about DraftKings. As we talked about, you throw down $5, you win an NFL game, you get $200 in free plays. Doesn't get much better than that. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. And you know what? If you got a gambling issue, 1-800-NEXT-STEP. They'll get you taken care of. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit. Eligibility restrictions do apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook. And you know what? You can't bet on high school games, but if you could, you'd want to bet the over on a lot of Dennis Bene's Salpointe teams because they were probably going to be going over with their offenses. Okay, Coach.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got now everybody in the city has asked me over the years, and you coached all these guys, how come some of these kids aren't in Arizona? And the more informed fan will look and they'll ask me, they'll say, why in the world is Arizona not Lathan Ransom's first offer or Bruno Fina's first offer? Take me through kind of those years because you were right there, obviously.
Yeah, and I look at, you could put these kids into like 4 categories, right? So there's the kids the U of A offered and they've worked out. There's the kids that the U of A offered and they haven't worked out. There's the kids the U of A offered and they went elsewhere. And then there's the kids that the U of A passed on. So unfortunately, in the last 20 years, I'd say most of the kids fall in, those latter 3 categories. Take Derek Bush, for instance. He's a tremendous corner playing for Coastal Carolina, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for us, he was long, athletic, and he was right in their backyard. And everybody around could see what a great athlete he was. Donovan Alumba is another one. Donovan Alumba, for 2 or
NFL.
3 years was on the Dallas, in the NFL. And so, it was just, I think the recruiting just wasn't as tenacious as it should have been. For example, when the schools were recruiting Bijan and Lathan, Mike, when I tell you LSU, Ohio State, Texas, UCLA, USC, I mean, they were at Salpointe weekly. When Chris O'Dowd went to USC, Pete Carroll and his staff, I mean, they would be on their private plane and they'd be at Salpointe once a week. Like every time I turned around, Pete Carroll and Lane Kiffin, were in the weight room, like checking out Christopher, and their O-line coach at the time was always at Salpointe. So these big schools that go after these kids, they're relentless in their recruiting. And, I never felt the U of A really went after some of these kids as hard as they should have.
Yeah, so let's kind of go in a timeline. I was talking with, and we talked about this on the phone a little bit, but I was talking with Kadeem Carey. And, Kadeem Carey, you know from coaching in Arizona that he was not exactly a secret. It wasn't like he snuck up on anybody. And I asked Kadeem about his recruiting, and he said, honestly, it really annoyed me that ASU offered me before Arizona. And this is back in the mid 2000s. You go after Blake Martinez, slow played by Arizona until the very end, signs with Stanford. And that's even before we get this absolute rush of talent that's at Salpointe, where Arizona coaches clearly didn't learn that we better take care of our backyard first.
Yeah, no question. I mean, Blake's a great example where, I mean, he was such an unbelievable player, so dominant. I mean, I can remember standing next to him when he was a senior in high school, and I couldn't believe just how big he was, how thick he was. And you know, the U of A was late on him, and so he ended up going to Stanford. Obviously, he's just had a great career. But again, you know, I think Kirby Smart and Dan Mullen just kind of had a little, you know, debate over recruiting, you know, after this Georgia-Florida game, how, you know, Kirby came out and said, you know, coaching can't beat recruiting. Like, you got to have dudes. And I don't care what level you're at. You know, we were so successful at Salpointe because we, you know, had great players, I had a tremendous staff, and we had a tremendous strength and conditioning program. So, you know, at the end of the day, recruiting, you know, is you know, the lifeblood of college football. You've got to identify these guys, and I just think, you know, more resources should be poured into recruiting to identify kids, get those kids that, you know, just jump off the film, get them offered, and stay on those kids. You know, you have to make them feel like Arizona is a place that they can reach their goals of playing in the NFL, because all these high end kids want to go to the NFL. I mean, that's the end game for those guys.
Right. All right. Let's go through Mateo Mele a little bit. He was the offensive lineman for you. You talked about how his recruiting took off. He's at Washington now. And this is a kid by all accounts, he should have been a priority recruit for Arizona from day one for a majority of reasons there, Coach.
Yeah, they, you know, and again, I'm not trying to bang on the U of A, because there are kids
Right.
that don't want to go to the U of A. You know, there are kids that want to leave, but Mateo's grandfather played for the U of A. You know, Mateo was in our backyard, but at the time, you know, the coaches, you know, they just slow played Mateo, and then they never established that relationship with him. And so, you know, he had about 20 offers, and I knew he wasn't going to the U of A because he just never built a relationship. You know, there was never that you know, there was never that relationship between coach and player. You know, when Texas was recruiting Bijan, you know, and I think it really came down to Ohio State and Texas for Bijan. And let me tell you, those running back coaches at each of those schools just daily, you know, were working on their relationship with Bijan. The other school was UCLA, because I thought Deshaun Foster did a tremendous job recruiting Bijan, and but it was about building a relationship with those players, and that was just never really done with Mateo. And it could have been so easy, especially with his grandfather being, you know, a former U of A football player.
Yeah, and Coach, to piggyback on your point, you're definitely not putting down Arizona. I think just a lot of people are frustrated with where the program's been, and a lot of people look at it and they say, you know, Salpointe's producing kids left and right. Why aren't they there? And I think that you're given the reason why in the past that a lot of these kids didn't show up there. Like you said, some kids aren't just going to go there, but in my opinion, and you know a lot more than me, let's just say, for example, Bijan Robinson can go anywhere in the nation that he wants. I'm of the opinion from an outsider that, you know what, even if he commits, you recruit that kid till the very end. He's 5 minutes away, and you need to, I mean, and even if you don't get him, it sets a template at least for the next Bijan Robinson out there.
Yeah, 100%. Like, you have to be relentless, relentless. And again, you know, I said this earlier, when Lathan and Bijan, we had um, Bruno, UCLA, LSU, Texas, Ohio State. I mean, they were at Salpointe, like, it seemed like every day. Like, they were at practice, they were constantly in contact, they were relentless in their pursuit, like relentless in their pursuit of these kids. And, you know, you have to recruit that kid until he looks you in the face and says no. And, you know, Bijan was really open because Rich Rod offered Bijan early and offered him first. And I think, you know, maybe if Rich was still at the U of A, things might have turned differently because, you know, Bijan was really, really thrilled to get offered first and early by Rich. And I had and still do have a really good relationship with Rich. You know, one of the things that's obviously hurting U of A is just the turnover in coaching, the inconsistency, and so, you know, players aren't sure, you know, what's happening. But no question, to your point, um, you have to stay on these kids to the very last minute. I mean, until you know that they've turned in an NOI somewhere else, and you know, and that's the bottom line.
The great thing here at the AZ Wildcats podcast and Go PHNX is that we get a lot of really cool guests, and Dennis Bene is certainly one of them. We're getting Dalen Terry from the basketball team tomorrow. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you stay locked on here at AZ Wildcats podcast. Okay, Coach, I wanted to ask one more recruiting question, and then we got a lot of comments here from people that want to kind of pick your brain a little bit. Bruno Fina is one other guy. That, to me, kind of encapsulates the issues with Arizona recruiting, being that everybody knows he's John Fina's son. John Fina was a late bloomer. Right. You could make the case that Bruno Fina was maybe a little bit of a late bloomer. And, oh, by the way, UCLA and USC offer him before Arizona. Even if you don't think you're going to get a kid, in my opinion, that just can never happen, Coach.
Yeah, that was a difficult one, you know. And John was a late bloomer, you know, and Bruno, no different, you know. But I'll never forget this. It was about 6 a.m. It was a winter workout. I think it was one of our very first workouts where colleges were allowed to come to campus. It was in the dark. We were on the practice field with the lights on, and the UCLA O-line coach was actually there. I think he was there probably looking at Bijan and Lathan, and he asked about Bruno, and I just said, listen, the kid's going to be a dude one day. He you know, he needs a couple years to mature, but his dad was phenomenal and a 10-year, you know, 12-year NFL vet, and you know, that's how it got started for Bruno, and they never stopped recruiting him from that day forward. You know, it's you know, Bruno being a kind of a legacy kid with John's great history at the U of A. Yeah, you never want to lose a kid like that because, you know, the flip side too is it's not. I've been frustrated when I thought the U of A has passed on kids because maybe they didn't fit the height and weight, you know, parameters, but these kids are high character kids, A students, kids that are great in the locker room, kids that, you know, are first in the weight room and last to leave, kids that are coming from a winning program, kids that want to play at the University of Arizona. I mean, we've had some kids that their dream school is the U of A, and the U of A has passed on them, and they've maybe offered other kids that quite honestly weren't as good. And so, again, it's a very tough process. It's not easy, but I hope Coach Fish and the guys here now can turn it around.
Okay, so let's get to some questions because we got a lot of them, and I knew this was going to be the first one. You answered this earlier, Coach, but I figured I'd let you go into it. Nick Howard says, who was the best player you ever coached?
Yeah, and I know this is going to be a little bit controversial, but the best player I ever coached was Cameron Denson, just because he was so dominant on both sides of the ball. Now, the most talented is Bijan Robinson. You know, Bijan has God-given ability and that just off the charts. But during my time at Salpointe, there was no one better than Cameron. He dominated big school football in the state of Arizona on both sides of the football.
Right. Okay. And then here's another one that I thought would be that was going to be asked. And I'm actually curious to hear what you have to say. Andre Veras says, who was the best Tucson player you ever faced, Coach?
The best Tucson player I ever faced. Boy, that's a good question. There was a lineman, I forgot his name. He was back in the day at CDO. He ended up going to ASU.
Um, I know who you're talking about too. Um, shoot, I know who you're talking about too. It's going to drive me up a wall. But yes,
Yeah.
I think
So
where. Go ahead.
he was tremendous. Gosh, what's his name? But he was really, really good. Played for Pat Nugent at CDO, and then there was a running back at Buena. Gosh, I apologize. I should know their
Jamal
names.
Womble.
Jamal, yeah, went
Yeah.
to North Carolina. Jamal Womble, his senior year was insane. Like we could not stop him. We could not stop. We won that game, and I don't know how because I think he rushed for like 300 yards. And then Flanagan Fowles at Tucson High. He was the only kid in 2013 that I thought shut Cameron down. And I told the guys when they asked me, the coaches would come into my office and say, "Hey, coach, who are the other guys in town you like?" And I said, "There's a DB at Tucson High who I think is unreal, and he's the only kid that stayed toe to toe with Cameron all year." And so I would say those three. I know I'm missing some, but those three are pretty dang good. And then lastly, Jamari. I mean, Jamari, what he did his senior year was just incredible. I thought Jamari was one of the best athletes, best dual threat quarterbacks that I had ever seen.
Was Jamari, because you obviously coached him his freshman year, was he, when he
Mm-hmm.
showed up there, because very rarely at Salpointe, a school like you have, do you have a guy that comes in immediately and is able to play quarterback like that to a certain extent? Was Jamari as good a young player as you've ever seen in the city?
Yeah. Cameron Denson, was a little thin boned, and that's why I was worried when they put him at DB because I just didn't think he had the structure to play defensive back, and I thought he was just a better wide receiver. But Jamari is just built different. He came in and was just his size, his speed. He could actually throw the ball really, really well. We worked on his mechanics and quite fun.
Right. Christina Pena, his mother, just said, "We love Coach Bene. Please tell him we just said hi."
Yeah, Christina's great, and I have nothing but love for her family, Jamari, and just a tremendous, tremendous kid.
Okay. I think Nick Howard makes an interesting point here that I think a lot of people don't quite ask, and it's an interesting question. How does the recruiting process work, Coach? Do coaches come to the player, the team coaches first? How exactly, when a team was reaching out to you, how did that go about? How did that recruiting process go?
Well, a lot of times, you have to, as a coach, that was one of the things where like I'll tell you, for instance, today I sent I think there's a young lineman. He actually plays for Jay Dobbins. His name's Jack and Dean. He's 6'6", 270. And uh, I talked to 10 coaches today about him because I had sent out his highlight film to them. Still have relationships with a lot of guys. And so I think that, the recruiting process should be initiated by the high school coach, and you want to, you're trying to get your guys out there. And so it's really easy now because of all the quick access to digital video. You have to put a quick highlight together. College coaches, though, they literally have about, they'll spend a minute, maybe 2 minutes looking at this tape. So this kid's got to pop right away. If they like him, they'll contact you, and then the ball's rolling. It's not as difficult as you think, but there are kids that you have to really, really push. Derek Bush ended up at Coastal Carolina because one of the coaches was a former player of mine. And I said, "Man, don't look at this kid. He can play all night long." And so we got him to Coastal Carolina. And so again, if you have relationships with the guys in college, it does help. And thank goodness that my staff and I, my former head coach Al Alexander was had a great influence on the recruiting process at Salpointe because he had built so many good relationships with guys across the country as well.
Where would you put the talent level in the state right now? Because I remember the difference to me between now and 20 years ago is immense, Coach. I mean, you look and, it was unheard of in 2000 to have 40 kids in any graduating class that were going to become Power 5 players. We're kind of at that point now where, Tucson's getting, 6, 7. Phoenix is going to get 30 in your outlying areas. To me, Arizona and ASU, even though a lot of kids in state want to leave, I mean, you've got a well of material to be able to go to from here.
Yeah, Arizona's really, in the last 20 years, really come a long ways. We've had some really high-profile quarterbacks, which has helped, obviously, with Spencer Rattler, and then the kid, the Purdy kid.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Purdy brothers, who have done really well at Iowa State, and I think Florida
Slovis.
State. Yeah, exactly. Who at USC, and but
Ty
some tremendous
Thompson, another
linemen have
kid.
come out. Yeah, Ty. Yeah, I mean, he led Mesquite to a 4A state championship. He's tremendous, and so the talent. I mean, the talent. When I tell you, especially up in the valley, is insane. We would when Bijan and Lathan senior year, we went up to an ASU 7-on-7 tournament, and the talent, the amount of talent on the field at any one time, like there was always like 7 to 10 legitimate D1 guys. And so, and obviously, Arizona's not a secret anymore. There's kids all over, and they don't necessarily have to be at the biggest schools. I think guys who do their homework. Gary Bernardi was a former Arizona coach. He was at Colorado for a long, long time. He used to come to Salpointe every year. Every year, he would never miss a spring football and look for kids and just scour Tucson. And, it was guys like that always had the best success because, again, they were unrelenting in their pursuit of talent.
All right, Coach. So we're going to let you go on, but I wanted to ask you a couple more follow-up questions. One thing, too, as we talked about, DraftKings, you're not on there. You should be on there. Throw down $5. It wasn't an NFL game. You get $200 in free plays. Coach, do you dabble in that at all?
Yes, I have a DraftKings account. I love it. Last night, I took Ohio over Miami of Ohio. I took the Lakers, and I took the Suns. So I had a great night on DraftKings last night.
Well, Coach, do you have any picks for the people out there this week? And again, Coach isn't guaranteeing they'll hit, but you know what? Do you got any picks out there, Coach?
No, I haven't looked, man. I haven't looked, but last night was definitely fun. I think the DraftKings app is tremendous and by far my favorite. So great sponsor to be lined up with, Mike.
For sure. Okay, Coach. Couple questions, and then we can't thank you enough for your time. What would you say then if you're to Jed Fish or to any Arizona staff about the importance of recruiting locally and how would you go about doing it if you were the head coach of the U of A, Coach?
Well, I'd have you got to put resources into it. So you have to have people, going to every high school in the state. And I mean, every high school in the state. And then, building a board, and then from there, identifying kids, and then building relationships, not only with the players, but with the coaches, because it's really, the relationship in that recruiting process with the high school coach is pretty important, very important, because you spend so much time in contact with them. And then I would, once you're in high school, and you identify a kid that you think fits into your program, you've got to make them feel a part. You got to make them feel that you want them, invite them to campus, get them on the sidelines, get them to camps, get them to, anytime you can get them on your campus and show them. I mean, I think the U of A has tremendous facilities, right? It's a beautiful campus. You're in the Pac-12. But you got to be relentless in it. You know, you can't just see a school, you know, stop by and then, hey, and you know, we'll see you 3-4 months later. And that's what happens. And those schools, you know, 9 out of 10 times will lose out, you know, because you've got 20 other schools that are in my ear or in the kids' ear, you know, on a daily, weekly basis, and invariably those kids are going to end up at those schools.
Coach, the great thing about being here is we get guys like you, you know, the dawn of the Arizona coaching scene on here on the AZ Wildcats podcast. Check out Go PHNX. And Coach, you gave the best read to DraftKings that we've had from any guest. So you know what? Well, we might be using that at some point. But I can't thank you enough, my man, and we would love to have you on again here shortly. You were fantastic.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Anytime, man. It's been an honor. I love what you do, and you've been doing great things for a long time. So keep it up, and all the best. And again, thanks for having me. It's been an honor, brother.
Appreciate the kind words. We'll talk to you soon, Coach.
All right, thank you. Take care.